So moved.
Any discussion? All
If I may, just a friendly amendment to that. We do have included at everybody's place a very small addendum to the agenda. This falls under agenda order 19D. It's just for information, but it is very important. It's a finding of air quality conformity for the Hampton Roads amended 2045 long-range transportation plan and for our fiscal year 21 through 2024 transportation improvement program regional conformity assessment. So we did want to show that before Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And all in favor?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. I'll just stop right now. Yes.
So Bob, I saw the note you came out and mentioned it email wise, but this was posted, but I didn't see it online. I must have missed it.
This is a process that our staff has reported on that we've been going through. This milestone was the receipt of the correspondence from the U.S. Department of Transportation that really closes the loop on the work that we've been doing.
What work?
Why don't I pause there if I can?
Yes, but please, or because this is being taken, please turn your microphone next time.
What work?
So if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to call on our long-range transportation plan coordinator, Dale Stitt. We are required to go through a federally designated process to demonstrate that our selected projects in our long-range transportation plan comply with our air quality goals identified for our region. So, Dale, I'll ask you to answer.
Sure, thank you, Bob. The end of last year, October, we had amendments to our 2045 long-range transportation plan. And once we amend the plan, then we have to go through this conformity process with Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration to make sure that our plan is conforming to air quality guidelines. Specifically for us, it just means that we've coordinated with the right stakeholders and that we've demonstrated fiscal constraint. So this letter is just confirming that our regional conformity assessment on the amendments we made back in October are satisfy all the federal requirements.
Okay, so we maintain whatever documentation needs for this maintained by TPO.
That's correct. Yes, this is a function of the transportation planning organization.
Okay, thank you very much.
I just got to recover first. All right, we need a motion and a second, please. Approve the agenda with the amended item. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. We're at the public comment period. We do have one individual who signed up to speak, and I hope I pronounced the name correctly. It's Rogard Ross. Good morning, welcome. Come up here, please.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
while he's coming, Central Lock told me to inform you that they are backed up in traffic. Been there for 45 minutes on your side of the bridge. She would love for you to send a private jet to come and pick her up. So I told her I would tell you that, sir.
I'm not sure what I did wrong. Yes, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Robert Ross. I live here in Chesapeake. I'm a member of the Chesapeake Bicycle and Trails Advisory Committee. And I want to just speak briefly in support for the transportation alternative set aside under item number 15 that you'll be considering and ask you to support that as recommended by the Technical Advisory Committee. In particular, in Chesapeake, we're very concerned about the Southampton Roads trail segments in Chesapeake and also in Suffolk. Finishing these trails is of great importance to the Southside community and critical links in building a trail that will eventually run all the way down to the ocean front. So thank you very much.
And thank you, sir. There are no submitted public comments, so no one else signed up to speak. Now we're to agenda item number 4, which is Executive Director Palmer's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Included in your agenda is my monthly report, which I would be happy to respond to any questions. I do have a few things I'd like to bring to your attention. First, I'd like to do a very quick announcement. Really pleased today to have our new staff member joining us. Kyle, would you mind standing very quickly? So I'd like to introduce Kyle Gilder to the HRTPO Board. Kyle will be joining Dell's team as a long-range transportation planner 2 position. He comes to us from the city of Virginia Beach, where he worked for the city schools. So really excited about his GIS, Geographic Information Systems, and other planning expertise he's going to bring to our organization. So if you get a chance, please welcome Kyle to our TPO regional team. So great to have you, Kyle. Secondly, I noted in my report, but I do want to say we have really doubled down in trying to keep very active both our TPO Facebook pages and our PDC Facebook pages. If you haven't been there in a while, please check them out. Really appreciate staff doubling down on that as we really have reactivated those over the past 2 months. So would ask that you take a look at them to stay up to date on regional efforts, and also please share with any of your constituents or other community groups as we try to spread the word of regional work. Thirdly, I did want to mention that tomorrow I'll be up in the peninsula, looking forward to a meeting with our chief administrative officers on the peninsula. One of the things we're going to be talking about is our Birthplace of America Trail project and efforts that we're looking at for how we take the 55-mile Virginia Capitol Trail and start to extend it down the peninsula. Coming down through Williamsburg and heading towards Newport News Park and being wholly down Fort Monroe. So we're going to be sharing some of the work that we've been doing with your municipal staffs. Most importantly, maybe some grant opportunities that we can collectively talk about for pursuing for savings of that trail. So I look forward to that tomorrow. And then finally, just really quickly, and Mayor Dyer, several of us and a number of regional mayors were at your State of the City yesterday. What a great presentation by Drone Up, a local company that is in Virginia Beach. Drone Up is a company that, of course, the mayor had a drone flying around the Virginia Beach Convention Center yesterday, which was really neat. But Drone Up is really thinking about how you deal with transportation logistics in a pretty creative way. Mayor, I think we learned yesterday that they have a contract starting in Arkansas with Walmart to do parcel delivery. Mayor, I didn't know if Mr. Chairman, if I could ask Mayor Dyer if he had any comments to add to that.
I'll tell you what, this is a company on the move. Their potential versatility is limitless about what they can do. Drones are now used for search and rescue operations and delivering packages and delivering, there's even some talk in transportation about drones being a shuttle service between the peninsula and the south side. What was disappointing though, Mr. Crum, was when they delivered the package and dropped it in front of us, myself and City Manager Dehaney, there wasn't a 6-pack of Guinness in it. No, but thank you for being there yesterday, and I'll tell you what, looking forward to all of the other mayors' presentation. I will say that the mayors are getting together, we're getting along, and whatever comes in our way, whether through cable, broadband, or wind energy, is going to benefit our region.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just want to say, I think with the Drone Up company, it is something we want to monitor as we think about what the future of transportation looks like. It is an interesting technology that we'll have to keep our eyes on. So, Mr. Chairman, back to you, sir.
Thank you. Now we'll ask for reports, beginning with the Commonwealth Transportation Board update.
Not much to report. The only item on the CPD agenda for this workshop, and again, it was a workshop, not the action meeting, was the Nike Park Road extension in Iowa County that was presented by Superintendent Hall and other members of the UDOT staff. Pretty well was favorably viewed, and I'm sure it'll be passed at the action meeting.
VDOT update?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Refer you for all the details to our update in the packet, but just real quickly, noticed a lot of activity out around the high-rise bridge project. We're finishing up the steel placement there over the channel as well as deck pouring, so we're still tracking to have the new bridge open end of May, early June, which will allow us to shift traffic completely onto that structure and begin our work on the modification of the old bridge for the final alignment of traffic by the end of the year. And then, of course, we just opened up the new winch deck exit ramp. Appreciate everybody's continued patience there with a lot of the activity going in and around the winch deck in Newtown interchange work there. And then the last item, I did mention at the last meeting that we did finally get the notice of intent from FHWA on our Bowers Hill study. That was a significant federal milestone in that study, and we were able to now get our public hearings rescheduled for the 26th and 27th of April. There will be a virtual hearing on the 26th and an in-person hearing on the 27th at our Hampton Roads District headquarters. And that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. There's no one here from the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. We'll hear from Virginia Port Authority.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The supply chain continues to be pretty overwhelmed. But the Port of Virginia, as I noted last time, is still doing significantly better than many ports across the nation. We have started to see some challenges, particularly for our motor carriers over on the Portsmouth side. We've had several of our large beneficial cargo owners just surge import volume into the port with no intent to pick it up anytime soon. And maybe they were wise. If you look at what's going on in Shenzhen and Shanghai right now, the Omicron variant has hit there pretty hard. They're shutting down for the next 2 to 4 weeks, both their facilities and their port facilities. And so maybe that will give us a little bit of a respite, but we did see a surge of volume that's just sitting. And so we reopened Portsmouth Marine Terminal for a short time to send some of that overflow import volume so it can be picked up outside of our gate hours and keep Virginia International Gateway itself from being as congested for our motor carrier community. In addition, today we put out a notice that we will be extending our gate hours by 2 hours each day, and including on Saturday. We've had some Saturday hours. We're gonna extend those by 2 hours as well. So again, just trying to give more of an opportunity. We've also started an inner harbor barge between Virginia International Gateway and Norfolk International Terminals. You know, we're constrained, CSX is constrained on the Norfolk side, which sometimes impedes our flexibility to move some services. But what we've done is we've moved some services over to NIT, which is a little more fluid, and then the rail volume will just barge over to Big for going out on CSX. So we're doing everything we can to work with our partners to remain fluid. We do now have 5 new first-in services. So from an economic development perspective, that's helping us attract new business and developers to the Hampton Roads area because they're moving their cargo where their cargo can move. Just upcoming projects, we are breaking ground this month on the Central Rail Yard, which will add 260,000 additional rail lifts at Norfolk International Terminals. That project will take about 1.5 years to complete. And I think I mentioned last time, we're accelerating the optimization of NIT North. So we'll be adding the semi-automated stacking cranes that we have on NIT South and Big to NIT North, which will increase our capacity by another 40% on that same footprint. Knock on wood, hopefully, Senator Sproul, when the budget is done, right now we have $266 million in both the House and the Senate versions of the budget. So hopefully in conference that will remain. It is a $650 million project. So this $266 million investment will help us accelerate that. We'll also be applying for a port infrastructure development grant on the federal side for some of the infrastructure money to help with that project as well. And then finally, on Portsmouth Marine Terminal, the 70-acre lease for Dominion that will become really a staging and pre-assembly hub for projects all up and down the East Coast. The invitation for bid goes out on Monday, March 21st, to handle that construction, to do the upgrades to that terminal, to handle those large components. So a lot going on. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to give you an update.
Thank you. I apologize.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask this question?
Yes, just one, please. Yes.
Kathy, you talked about the overflow going to some port there. I can't remember which one it was. Does it still have the same, that where it's being loaded, does it still have the same automated scheduling, so you don't end up a lot of trucks backed up?
So at Portsmouth Marine Terminal, no, we do not have the semi-automated, but what we're doing is we're very surgically targeting just those very specific large beneficial cargo owners. So only their cargo that's meant to almost be stored rather than moved will be put over there so that they can come and get it when they're ready. What's happening is upstream at the supply chain, their warehouses don't have capacity right now, but they wanted to get it here in anticipation of what's happening in China right now. And so it's not a matter of movement and backing up. It's one or two beneficial cargo owners who are coming in outside of our gate hours, mostly in the evenings, and picking up those boxes as they're having room in the warehouse to take them on.
I want to apologize for not calling the names of the previous speakers. This is being live streamed, and for those, I guess, who are watching online, it would be helpful to know who's making the presentation. So, with that, we have our transfer agencies report, HRT by William Harold.
Mr. Chair, it's old Harold today. But everybody's Harold. But I certainly want to thank our federal delegation. We were successful in applying for additional funding from the federal government as a result of the impacts, the lingering impacts of COVID. We were successful in landing another $52 million, which will be helpful in terms of maintaining the board's multi-year strategy of supporting critical transit services. There are three pillars to that: labor stability, trying to make sure that we can continue to incentivize our operators, supporting core operations such as cleanliness, making sure we have fuel to operate, and finally to mitigate fare box losses so that our 6-member cities are protected for years to come. So we're very excited about that, and we certainly want to thank Senators Warner and Kane for their support. Thank you.
It's old Harold if you brought your 6-pack of Guinness.
Bobby McDyer will supply it.
Wada, Zach, Trident.
I'll have to follow that. Not much of note, we will also be applying some funding opportunities we recently announced for some bus facilities through the FTA. So we also will be looking at applying for that. And as Mr. O'Hara was saying, looking for support from our federal delegation and such, but I appreciate the support of the NPO as well to go through that.
Thank you. Now our Freight Transportation Advisory Committee, Bob Everly.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you. We had our most recent quarterly meeting 2 weeks ago, and it was a very good meeting. We received an update from the board on the Port Infrastructure Development Program that Kathy mentioned a few minutes ago, and the committee will provide a letter of support for that effort at the appropriate time in the process. We also had an update from the state-wide Freight Advisory Committee, in particular talking about the DRE Driver Development Program, which is another effort to bring new drivers into the industry to help move all the containers that are coming into port to their proper destination. We also had a long discussion about priorities for the Freight Transportation Advisory Committee, talked about 6 different items, and made some good progress. Those topics will be continued discussion at the meeting in the quarter. We had an update from Virginia Department of Transportation on their truck parking study, which is now in phase 2. Mr. Johnson came down from Richmond. We appreciate his willingness to come down and talk with us. The committee had talked about concerns about trucks not having proper or safe parking locations in a variety of places, and Mr. Johnson was able to give us a very good view of the problem statewide. In fact, he identified that Virginia is in the top 25% of states with reported truck parking shortages. And the data that they were able to collect so far shows 20 locations in the state where there is serious overflow at night where trucks cannot find a place to park and have to park in rather undesirable locations. Our current need is, we have about 8,000 spots, a little over 8,000 spots statewide right now. We didn't need an additional 3,244 today. And by 2045, we need another 8,574. And that's just using known and clearly identifiable shortages. That does not include kind of hidden needs. For example, there's very little need shown in this area, and that's just not possible. Those trucks are parking someplace and moving in and out of this area someplace. I don't fault the study in the least. They're using the very best data that they can put their hands on. But it's quite clear that there's a significant need for additional parking facilities in this area as well. I understand that there's a phase 3 that is planned, and they'll try to go into further depth to try to better identify the issues that are involved, ferreting out exactly what is needed. And we had 2 new members who joined the committee at the last meeting, and they were very engaged in the conversation, so I'm very happy to have them on board as well. That's very important.
Thank you. Community Advisory Committee, Mark Christophe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our last meeting was the week before your last meeting in February, and that's already been reported on. Our next scheduled meeting is in April, so look for a report in May.
Thank you. Our military liaisons update, Lieutenant Commander Michael Lawrence, U.S. Coast Guard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our Coast Guard team remains dynamically engaged with the ongoing activity within the Portland region. A few recent highlights include drafting up safety zone regulations in support of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel construction project. This effort will help protect the construction zone and workers by providing a 500-foot safety zone around the tunnel construction. Once finalized, this will be expected to remain in effect for the duration of the project. We are also working with the Port of Virginia regarding the arrival of 2 new gantry cranes, ship-to-shore cranes, expected to arrive in a couple weeks to Norfolk International Terminal, and also the departure of a few of their older gantry cranes. Specifically, we are coordinating with the Virginia Pilots Association to provide vessel deconfliction during inbound or outbound transit due to the large size and nature of these cranes. Again, with the overall goal of ensuring safety to waterways and the port infrastructure. We always appreciate the coordination with our fellow local and state agencies. In particular, we worked closely with VDOT in support of the recent I-64 high-rise bridge improvement project, where we communicated and enforced intracoastal waterway closures to provide construction crews a safe, unobstructed environment to conduct work without vessel interference. These multi-day closures stretched over weeks and resulted from strong communication from both agencies and effectively spreading the word to our mariners. Finally, we have been involved with the shared bridge operational management for railroad bridges within our area of responsibility. We have facilitated a number of railroad bridge closures to allocate time for much needed maintenance to occur, while being sure to carefully balance the needs of the railroads and mariners who rely on these waterways. That is all I have to pass at this time. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. This meeting Representative Michael King have on the list, but I don't see him. So we're going to move on to our airport representatives. from Norfolk International, Robert Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to report that the Norfolk International Airport is continuing its steady recovery from the depths of COVID pandemic effects on passenger travel. For calendar year 2021, we showed an 87% increase in passenger activity over calendar year 2020. And for the first 2 months of 22, we are showing an increase of 90% over the same period in 2021. The funding that we've received from the federal government for COVID relief has been a big factor in sustaining the operations at Norfolk International Airport. Since 2020, we've received $42.8 million from the three primary COVID relief acts. That money has been used for debt service and for airport authority employee wages, salaries, and benefits to retain the employees and also to compensate them properly and to attract new employees at the same time. Those were the two primary priorities for that money, and that's where we applied it to. Also, the bipartisan infrastructure law, we will be receiving $33 million over a 5-year period, which will be used for infrastructure projects. And the primary use of that money is going to be for the continued reconstruction and rehabilitation of our primary runway at Norfolk International Airport. Finally, we had more good news from Breeze, who is our newest carrier at Norfolk International Airport, that they're adding 4 new nonstop destinations from Norfolk over the course of the summer. Those include Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Jacksonville, and Savannah. For those, that'll bring their, since May of last year, that would bring their total nonstop destinations out of Norfolk to a total of 14. And they are very aggressively looking at further expansions down the road. And that is my report.
Thank you. And now we'll go to Director Cohn for agenda items 14 and 15.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to introduce agenda item 14, our Hampton Roads Gateway Analysis. And I'm going to turn the floor over to our 2 lead staff people on this work. Our Chief Transportation Engineer, Dr. Rob Case, and our Principal Transportation Engineer, Keith Nichols. And I think their title slide sort of says it all. We raised this question, is Hampton Roads a cul-de-sac or a gateway, as a means to generate conversation. I would present to you that we are a gateway, and that we are a gateway, that we need to be very intentional, and we need to be very strategic about how we plan and invest in the most strategic way to offer the most return for our region on the various transportation corridors. I think this board has had a number of conversations about these critical gateways that connect us to the I-95 corridor into other markets. We've talked at great length about the importance of the I-64 corridor. We've talked at great length about the 58 corridor and that connection point to I-95. With our port partners, we talked about how we move freight from our ever-expanding port and how we most efficiently move that freight to various corridors. More recently, conversations have been coming from North Carolina about a potential I-87 connection. And then even in the last several years, we hear more and more about, well, how do we connect up the Eastern Shore towards Wallops Island, right? So there's a lot of things that we've been thinking about, but I think if we just simply look back at how we advanced our regional transportation priorities, Mayor, we were strategic, we were thoughtful, we prioritized, and we've been successful. Our concern is that if we're advocating for all of these corridors, we may not be successful in bringing the amount of funding that we need to this region to really make these connection points. So what we were interested in doing, and I want to thank our chair, Mayor Tuck, for this, because he's really challenged us to think about a conversation about what the data and what the information lead us to in terms of the importance of these various corridors. Mayor, that started when you were talking about 58, and we've had a lot of those conversations in I-64. So what we want to begin today is a conversation with you as our policy board on some background information on these various corridors. We think the data is very important to take a look at in terms of what's happening on each of these corridors today, and really use this as a platform to think about how we connect some of these decisions to economic growth in our own region, where we're best strategically positioned for economic development sites, how we best move freight from our to and from our region, how we invest in these transportation gateways to really generate the highest quality of life possible for our community. So I'm going to ask, I believe Keith Nichols is going to start us off, or Rob Case, I apologize, is going to start us off, and then and with Keith, I think they have some really good information we can share. So Rob, I'll turn it over to you. So.
Thank you. Yes, as Director Crum said, we want to look at that connection to the rest of the U.S. As Ms. Vick said, we're well positioned for connecting the port to the rest of the world over the ocean, but we need that connection for our social and economic well-being to the rest of the U.S. And we're looking at these 7 gateways here that are shown on the map. And improvements, as Mr. Crum said, have been proposed to these, but we wanted to do a strategic and systematic analysis of some of those improvements. So today, Keith is going to handle the need for improvements that are shown there under number I there. And then the second part, I'm going to look at the transportation impact. And as Mr. Crum said, this is not our whole study. This is just a mid-study report. So Keith, if you'll take it, we'll look at those, the need for improvements.
Great, thank you, Rob. Good morning. As Rob said, I'll start by showing you some data that we've collected in terms of how much these gateways are used entering and exiting our region, both by the general public, and then I'll also look at truck volumes and where trucks are entering and exiting the region, and then look at safety before turning it back to Rob. So what this chart is showing you is the number of vehicles that pass in and out of our region through each of these 7 busiest gateways on a typical day in the year 2019. So all this data that you'll see today is pre-COVID or before the impacts of COVID really impacted travel in and out of our region. Not really surprising, I-64 is by far the most used gateway getting in and out of our region. On a typical day, about 72,000 vehicles pass through the gateway on I-64 in James City County. The second busiest gateway we were a little surprised to see was Route 168 from North Carolina. Obviously, the Outer Banks is a very popular destination, and there's a lot of traffic swing between the Outer Banks and Hampton roads. But if you've driven through Moyock recently, it's amazing how quickly the development continues to grow in that area. So even though it's the second busiest gateway, there is the caveat that a lot of that is commuter traffic going from these new developments in Moyock to presumably Chesapeake and other areas in Hampton roads for work. The third busiest gateway is Route 58. About 22,000 vehicles use that gateway in and out of our region. Interesting to note here, when you talk about I-87, that's the Route 17 corridor going from North Carolina. Currently, that only carries about 1/5 of the traffic in and out of our region that I-64 currently does. So that was interesting to note when you look at that. We also wanted to look at the growth in traffic in and out of our region. So this shows the 7 gateways and the amount of traffic that it carried in 2011 and the amount of traffic that it carried in 2019. What was interesting to note to me here is how consistent the growth has been on all of our gateways in and out of our region. So if you look at I-64, going from 2011 to 2019, it was about 13% growth in the amount of traffic going in and out of our region on that gateway. If you look at Route 58, it's 14%. If you look at US 17, the proposed I-87 from North Carolina, it's about 16%. So the only gateway that we saw that was really an outlier was Route 17 in Gloucester. We actually saw a small decrease in the amount of traffic that used that gateway. But every other gateway was all right around that 10 to 15% increase, which, like I said, seemed really interesting to me how consistent it was between all the gateways. Another way you could look at that is the split, the amount of traffic that uses each gateway relative to one another. So if you look at I-64 in 2011, about 42% of the traffic going through our gateways used the I-64 gateway in 2011. You look at 2019, the exact same number. So no change in the split using I-64 going in and out of our region between those 2 years. If you look at 168, it's about 15 to 16%. If you look at US 58, 13.1 to 13.2%. So once again, as I said, not a lot of shift going on from one gateway to another in terms of total volumes going in and out. This slide's a little difficult to see, but I'll just tell you that we wanted to look also at the seasonality and the day of week that the traffic is using these gateways. So for a lot of our work we do in our region, we look at weekdays, we look at peak hour volumes, we look at congestion levels, at the busiest hours. When you look at our gateways, it's a little different though. So just to give an example, at the top left for I-64 during the summer, the busiest day of week is Friday, followed very closely behind by Saturday and Sunday. So if we just looked at weekdays on I-64, it would definitely not tell the full, paint the full picture that you see there. It carries about 90,000 vehicles each day during the summer, whether it's Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. So when we're looking at congestion levels and some of the impacts of these gateways, we definitely need to look at those weekends, and in particular during summer, because it's such a big difference when you look at one season to the next. Just to give the example on I-64, depending on the day of week, it carries 15 to 20,000 more vehicles on a given day during the summer than it does during the non-summer. So we definitely need to keep that in mind here as we move forward in the study, look at the importance of these gateways. We also want to look at trucks, obviously, with the importance of freight movement in and out of our region. And this tells a little different story than we see with volumes. I-64 is still the most used gateway by trucks, with about 7,000 trucks on the average weekday in 2019. But if you look at Route 58, you look at Route 460, they're much closer to I-64 than you would see if you just looked at typical volumes. And if you actually add the volumes from Route 58 and 460 together, more trucks use those gateways combined than use I-64. So definitely interesting to note that. Also interesting to note is when I showed you the regular volumes, how consistent the growth was. We're not seeing that when it comes to truck movement. So if you look at I-64, there was about 9% growth from 2011 to 2019. However, when we look at US 460, it's in 28%, I think it says. Route 50 is 41% growth. So much more growth we're seeing on the south side through the gateways here when it comes to truck movement. It's probably not particularly surprising. There's been so much development in Suffolk and Isle of Wight in recent years, the Center Point property, for example, and in those corridors, that it definitely makes sense that they would use Route 58 and 460 as corridors getting in and out of our region. As we move forward, with the I-64 widening project and then the HRTP being widened here over the next few years, it'll be interesting to see if this shifts back more to 64 as some of the congestion gets moved out of that corridor, or if the continued development in Suffolk and Isle of Wight will continue to see a shift more toward the south side in terms of trucks. You can see the same story here when you look at split. So 43% of the trucks entered and exited our region on I-64 in 2011. That's down to 39% when you look at 2019. And then same with US 58. It increased from 22% up to 26% in 2019. Route 460 increased from 13 to 14%. So you can see a little bit better here just how much this is shifting toward the south side gateways. One other thing I wanted to present today is safety. Obviously, very important that we can make these gateways as safe as possible to the traveling public. So what we did is we looked at how these gateways compared to the typical statewide average, similar type roadway. So for I-64, we compared the crash rates on that roadway with typical rural interstates throughout the region. For Route 58, we looked at similar type principal arterials that are rural throughout the state. And so on this, if you see the line shown in gray, that means the crash rate is actually lower than the statewide average. So we don't think safety is as big an issue there. But as you get into the yellows, the oranges, reds, and darker reds, it may have crash rates more than 3 times the state average. So just give you an average here, if you look at I-64 east of Richmond, from around exit 205 to the Hampton Roads line, there is definitely a safety problem in that area. Sections of that have crash rates more than 3 times the statewide average for rural interstates. So definitely issues with safety in that area. If you look at some of the other roadways, like 58, 460, you'll notice there are safety problems on the notorious section of 1358, 460, the connector. We definitely have a safety issue in that area. Once again, if you've driven that roadway, probably not a big surprise on that. We're also seeing the towns along some of these roadways, like Emporia or Wakefield, Windsor. We do see crash rates that are well above average in those areas. So those areas where you have to slow down and pass through the towns, we do see safety issues in those areas as well. Same thing on the Eastern Shore. A lot of the towns, we see safety issues there. And the last thing I wanted to present, the AFTAC asked us to look at truck safety as part of this study. So we didn't have a comparable statewide average to use for truck crashes. We simply had to look at the number of crashes per 100 million truck miles of travel. So what is the rate of truck crashes on each of these corridors? So I-64 actually has the highest rate of crashes for trucks, about 142 truck crashes involving trucks for every 100 million miles that trucks travel. That was interesting because you usually don't see crash rates being that high on a limited access freeway like I-64. You usually see it on roads that have more stoplights and stops and things like that. So that definitely tells you that there is a problem with safety on I-64. And in addition, it's a big problem for the trucks entering our region too. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rob, and he'll talk some more about the key today projects and his analysis.
Thank you, Keith. Yes. So having looked at the need, we're going to look at the transportation impacts of some of these projects that have been proposed that Director Crum mentioned. So you see there on the lower left, I've got 2 projects on 58, 2 on 17 south of the region, and then 1 on I-64. So let's get into that. This is 58. First, I want to show the traffic signals that are existing on this roadway. There are a dozen traffic signals between Suffolk and I-85, which serves central North Carolina. And particularly want to show you here, these 5 signals here in the first 3 miles that's blown up in the lower right-hand corner. And Keith mentioned the center point distribution centers. Those are the white boxes that you see here along the roadway. And there are already 5 signals there, which is important for the distribution centers and that kind of thing, but it can slow us down when we're trying to move in and out of the region. So VDOT has proposed 2 projects for I-58. One I'm calling mostly limited access, because if you see in the blue here, this is already limited access, the Suffolk bypass and the Franklin bypass and the Cortland bypass. But then the proposal in purple is to take these sections and make them what we call fully controlled access. In other words, no traffic signals. And then, but the black areas would remain signalized. So a couple of signals in Emporia, and then those signals, those 5 signals that I mentioned there in that part of Suffolk. So that would get us, though, a 5-minute improvement in travel time because of the purple. Okay, then the second project for 58, I'm calling I-58, because it would be an interstate. And so, of course, you'd have that interstate grade improvement all the way west of Emporia. And that would buy you twice as much time savings versus today. So 12 minutes quicker if that were built. Okay, so let's look at what has been proposed as I-87. This is the Chesapeake region of Hampton roads. And today in blue, the top part is already fully controlled access. That's the Veterans Bridge that you're familiar with. And then the purple is not fully controlled, but it is mostly out in the country and undeveloped, and so it moves pretty well. So if you were to upgrade that to interstate, you would get a moderate improvement of travel time of 2 minutes. Okay, so let's look at the North Carolina portion. At the top of the page is the existing condition, and you can see North Carolina has done even more with the blue, the already fully controlled access. So you have Elizabeth City bypass and some other bypasses in here at Evacuation and on down. And then the whole stretch from, I think that's Williamston, all the way to Raleigh is fully controlled access. Now, it's not most of it's not interstate, but it is a very high quality roadway. So the idea would be to make that an interstate the whole way. And that would get you 14-minute improvement versus today. And that would make it competitive with 58, which is currently the quickest way to get down there. Okay, so finally, the 64, what we call the gap, which you're mostly familiar with, from Lightfoot to Bonneville's Bridge. And Keith was talking about the safety issues in this region here. The idea would be to make it 3 lanes in both directions, just like it is on the Richmond side and on the Williamsburg side. And that would get you about 2 minutes travel time improvement, because there's not consistent congestion there, but as Keith said, with the accidents, you can really get a lack of reliability in that region. If something goes wrong, you sort of bumper to bumper, and then if something goes wrong, you've got a problem. So let's look at what would be the transportation impacts of those projects. Not just, do they feel good, but what would they actually do? What about trips between Hampton roads and the external areas? So like I said, for our social and economic well-being, we need to interact with these other regions. And what about trucking? And what about hurricane evacuation? So first, let's look at the trips. These are today's trips shown on the right. Each dot is a trip to and from these regions within Hampton Road to Hampton Roads, which is shown in white. And these are trips for all reasons, business trips, family trips, vacations, shopping trips, whatever. And so, not surprisingly, as Keith said, down here in the Mooryock area, you've got a lot of trips, commuting, shopping, whatever. And then with the Richmond area, we've got a lot of interaction with that area. And even Northern Virginia, you can see here, and out the I-81 corridor. Then you can see here central North Carolina, Raleigh, and Greensboro. And so we want to be connected to these areas. So this is the snapshot of today. Well, what would these projects do? They would decrease the travel time, and so they would increase the interaction with these areas. So let's look first at what I'm calling the mostly limited access on 58, which is this brown project shown here along the border. And not surprisingly, it increases interaction with the communities that it serves, which is in central North Carolina. So Raleigh, Durham, Greensboro, Winston-Salem, and Charlotte. Okay, but that's your 5 minutes. That's what you get. But if you go with the 12 minutes of I-58, then you get that much more increase down in Fayetteville and all in central North Carolina. A little bit out in Western Virginia, but most of Western Virginia is served by I-64 from here. So then let's look at the portion of I-87 in Virginia. That's this short piece up here. And those 2 minutes get you an increase with northeastern North Carolina. Then if we look at the North Carolina portion of I-87, that, not surprisingly, is going to increase our interaction with eastern North Carolina, so all the way down to Wilmington. Okay, now if we throw all those together, oh, one more, 64 gap. Now surprisingly, that 2 minutes gets you a big increase with Richmond and DC, because there's so much going on in those two areas that even 2 minutes can make a difference in additional interaction. So if we throw all those together on one chart, you can see, we add those red dots together, you can see I-58 with a lot of increase in interaction, and the 87s here in the middle, and then the 64 gap here on the right-hand side. Then, of course, we got to talk about cost. So these things are not cheap. We have 58, the mostly limited access at $1 billion, but that's, what is that, Keith? It's about 50, 70 miles or something like that. So it's a big project. Then you go to the interstate, you got to build interchanges, you got to do all kinds of things, gets you up to $3 billion. Same with I-87 in Virginia. You might think, oh, well, I've driven that highway, it looks pretty nice. Well, but you got to build interchanges down in the southern part. You got to improve this interchange here outside the building, where 464 and 17 and 168 all come together. You can't just dump a bunch of traffic into there and leave that thing like it is. So put all that together, you get about $1 billion in cost. We're putting 0 for North Carolina because that's not our money, but Mr. Crum likes to point out that we compete with North Carolina for those funds. So we got to keep that in mind. And then the 64 gap, you're looking at about $700 million. Okay, so what we've done is we've taken these trips and we've taken these costs and we're dividing the two. So you get like a bang for the buck or a cost effectiveness. And in this way, we're showing the cost for each additional trip, and you want a lower cost, of course, unlike the other charts. You want a lower cost per additional trip. And so we got here the 58s are about $200 per additional trip. That's what we have to spend to create this interaction. The 64 gap is the cheapest one at $81. And then, other than, of course, North Carolina, which is free, right? So, and then the 87 in Virginia being the most expensive one. So, next and lastly, I want to look at the trucking. So we do the same thing. We start out with the dots of today. This is 2017. And keep in mind, this is not just the port trucking, this is all trucking. So not surprisingly, most of our interaction is with West Virginia, Virginia, and North Carolina. But we do, as you know, the port reaches all the way out to Chicago. So this is today, same kind of thing. What do those projects do to this? They're going to bump that up, and then I'm just jumping to the end. I've already divided. This is the cost effectiveness of these 5 projects. And so you see a very similar story. You see the cheapest one being 64 gap, and then the 58 one's sort of in the middle, and then the Virginia 87 being expensive, and the North Carolina 87 being free. So then lastly, but not least, we've got the impact on evacuation. I look at it in 3 ways. One, you want a capacity improvement. When you've got this big slug of additional traffic evacuating, you need new capacity. And that's what you get from I-58 and the I-64 gap. So whereas today you go out the 64 gap, for example, you might do okay when you get there because the traffic is lower. But if you're sending a big slug of evacuation, you're going to have a massive backup there. So those 2 projects help you the most. The next one being the 58, mostly limited access, helps you a little bit because it helps you with travel time. And then the I-87 projects are not on the evacuation route because the state doesn't want us heading south because they consider that the storm will come from the south. So this is my last slide. This is what we showed you today, the volumes, the safety, and the transportation impacts. And then we're continuing to work on forecasted volumes and congestion, and then three other impacts: quality of life, community, and economic development that Mr. Crum mentioned. So we're looking at more of a holistic return on investment. And so with that, I'll turn it back to the chair, and Keith and I can answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just to sort of start this conversation. So we've begun to approach this a little differently than maybe previous transportation conversations, in that we've already been socializing some of this information with your economic development professionals. Your regional economic development directors are beginning to think about this in terms of what investments we make, how they line up with economic job creation opportunities in our region. We really wanted to be able to give that lens and look forward to taking some of their input and bringing that back as future chapters. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to you, and we look forward to the discussion.
And thank you for the presentation. As Mr. Crum said earlier, I guess what I came to you, one of the things that concerned me was we had projects primarily the peninsula and around the south side, but what was happening for those communities that were still a part of HRTPO that were along the 58 corridor. So we started meeting with some of the representatives from there and had some interesting conversations and some interesting feedback. So I thought today really was very enlightening and eye-opening about the transportation route. So with that, just want to go around and get your thoughts and opinions about what you saw and maybe your thoughts about how we want to proceed forward. Yes, they're doing.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Looking at the numbers, it seems like there's quite a case for Route 58. We discussed that in the past. And when we are looking at these numbers are from 2019. And the growth that we've experienced, which was the center point now, supports logistics part. We just had a ribbon cutting for Massimo's and Eddie. That is going to be their entire East Coast distribution center, 335,000 square foot facility. So this is the type of growth that we're seeing, and obviously the 58 corridor that we're working on now. I might let the manager give you some more information on that. That is the largest project that the city of Suffolk has ever tackled. From what I understand, it's going to run about 3 years in the making to create those 3 lanes on both sides of 58 to get that traffic from the park to 64 to the port, and we're just seeing a significant amount of growth. And this was kind of eye-opening to me, looking at the numbers, that 58 had the 3rd highest truck traffic. And that's a 2019 figure. I think it would be incrementally, considerably more if we look at it now. So welcome news to us. And the manager will give you a bit more details of what we've been doing.
Of course, currently we have a short section of 58 under construction from our bypass down to the center point area. When we had a ribbon cutting the other day, we had 1 lane there, and my phone was burning up as I sat in traffic. But really, to take a look as we move forward, in the next few years, we have 9 million square feet of industrial on the books, ready to go. This is not, this is happening. And of course, as we talked about, right there, 460, bypass. We have another one in the planning that's not even in the 9 million. So the port is really, and thank you to the port, helping Suffolk out to grow, helping our growth, but it also brings its impacts. And even if they don't stop at Suffolk, they're going to Carolina, they're going south from the port. So what we saw here a few minutes ago, I think we have been feeling that was what was happening. And so just to give you a little background where we are, and of course we are seeing the growth in Suffolk, and I think our corridors, along with the increase in rail traffic to the city, and where we have some crossings there that create issues for our local traffic. That just tells a story of what we've been seeing.
First of all, I'd like to thank Chairman Tuck and Director Crum for the study. It's one that, we've been talking about for a while, and it's about time for this organization to start looking at your poor relatives to your west. So thank you. We are the gateway, I think starting in Southampton County, the western gateway to Hampton roads. And, even though we talk about the X number of cities, I think there's 17 jurisdictions here. So again, thank you for the study. I think it was very eye-opening. I think it gives us all an opportunity to take a really, really deep look at how we might make some of this happen.
Mayor West.
I guess, I think it's enlightening too. It's real interesting to see these numbers. My question is, we have that 4,000 acre potential mega site on 17. And should that, come into fruition and becomes a major site for manufacturing and further development, would that change all of this greatly or maybe just minimal?
So I think that's exactly the type of considerations we want to be looking at. And if, that policy position would advance in Chesapeake, and that does become that large mega site, there's, those are the type of considerations that we need everybody's help in terms of what we consider. We have things happening in Suffolk, we have that coming in Chesapeake, I know James City County, you have greenfield sites, as does York County, and things happening around Williamsburg, and we really need to be thinking about, how these investments are frankly an investment into those opportunities for us. So Mayor, thank you for bringing that up, and those will be the type of things that we want to be incorporating, and maybe some things you could go home and think about and what you bring back to us, because it's going to be important to us to understand what assumptions we should be making in the next phase of this study. So if you don't mind, Mayor, if I can say it, so it's the Williams tract, and would we be anticipating a portion of that? Is that not on your plans? James City County, your greenfield economic development sites, what assumptions we need to be making there? How these investments might help with that? Those are all things. What investments do to the issues, Mr. Moore, you were talking about. Those are all the type of inputs we really, and more than we want to enter into this. Mr. Chairman.
Well, I think one of the, you're doing?
Thank you, Chairman. One other comment, we spoke about the commercial aspect. If we look back at the evacuation routes, one of the catalysts behind the 460 improvements was to have a western evacuation route, and 58 is an alternative to that. Which would allow all our citizens a major evacuation route, head through Franklin, Petersburg, to Richmond. So I think that needs to be a prime consideration as well. And of course, we got 430 square miles we can do some more investing in also. But between those two factors, I think it's significant to make that.
Mayor Price?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, thank you for this information, that the regional connector study, I want to make sure that they have this information as well as we go into phase 3.
Mayor Pons?
Thank you, I appreciate the information. I guess the question I had, obviously there's limited funds, if we have enough money, we take care of all this. But if you start to prioritize projects, if you look for the low hanging fruit, And those projects that will provide the greatest impact, for example, if you were to finish, if we finished at 64, would that lessen the need for some of the improvements that may be needed on 168, 58, 17?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, so thank you, Mayor Pons. Yes, I think looking at the interconnectivity of improvements in one gateway and how they impact the overall the others is an important part of this. The one thing that I think I want to say, and I'll just sort of jump ahead, is I don't think it's a war, I think it can be an aid, right? I think that any healthy region has more of one way to move in and out, right? And let's be completely honest, I think the data gives a really strong argument for the I-64 corridor, the I-58 corridor, or the Route 58 corridor. I really believe that. So what I want to stress is it's not that we have to pick one over the other, that I'm afraid that if we're dispersed over 5 corridors, we're going to have challenges, right? But I do think, that there's some way here to look at how we combine strategies and make it an and rather than an or. And I don't want this to be divisive from that, because I really think we need to think about, Mayor, thank you, hurricane evacuation, right? And what we do there. And all the other things that we talked about. The more connections we can get westward to that I-95 corridor, I think the better we're going to be.
Supervisor Shepherd? Yeah, just to make sure I understand them. Trying to help the poor cousins or brother-in-laws or whatever they are out there. Now, I'm thinking of what we've got in 2045, what we've done in all the plans before, and we've gone through the vetting process that was established and has become nationally recognized as a very valid and efficient way of doing this. And it appears to me that obviously these corridors will be very, very important. I mean, right now, we're putting a great deal of effort in a gap. Okay? And it's a huge amount of money still out there. So, 2 questions I have. Are we going to still use the prioritization process that this would feed into HRTPO management? Because it's all on the bill that came out in 2013 to establish this whole funding process. I mean, that's the first question. And if we're going to do that, then the scoring is going to be very apparent to everybody in here, and it doesn't require it, because the old adage, if you prioritize everything, nothing has a priority, right? So there's got to be some sequence of rationality. The part to this, though, is to manage expectations of when this would happen, because we are essentially spent all our money out for another, so where are we, 22, so we're still out to 45, and we've spent all our money. So we're talking something in the latter half of the century, right? Unless somebody comes up with any money trees.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, and Mr. Shepherd, again, thank you, excellent comment, and really frames why we're embarking on this process. As mentioned, well, a couple of things. Many remember, and I know we all do, that the 2313 for HRTPO requires the money to be spent on projects with the most congestion relief for residents of this planning distribution region. Unfortunately, many of the projects that we're talking about today don't meet that congestion relief. That's the first challenge we have with HRTPO. Their reliability, their economic development drivers, their safety drivers, everything our transportation professionals talk about. The second problem we have is, Mr. Shepherd, is as you mentioned, for HRTPO, we're fully expended. We need to bring other color money to this region that's not HRTPO money to really influence these corridors. And to do that, I think we need to do exactly what we're doing on I-64. Our General Assembly members, thank you for your work. We don't know how the budget's all going to play out, but there is one, and we'll talk about this under other items on consent, that right now, we've kept I-64 on our peninsula as a regional legislative priority. Right now, there's $190 million at play at the General Assembly, general fund money to complete Segment 4, the last 9 to 10 miles within the Hampton Roads region. That's an example of opportunity. Now, we don't know what's going to come out the other side, Senator, but we know that at least that's in conversation right now when they reconvene. It's advocating for money through the General Assembly. It's advocating for federal dollars that I think we're going to need to do to be able to address some of these gateway corridors, because I think they're going to be outside what HRTPO can fund. So we're going to need to look strategically about how we supplement those funding dollars.
Mr. Schiffer, your mic's still on.
Yeah, I don't know how to turn this thing off.
I don't know if you had a follow-up comment or question. Anyone else? Comment or question? Yes,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Looking at it from the freight perspective, we watched a significant increase in congestion and risk as we're going through Suffolk. We're very happy to see the economic development. No qualms whatsoever about that. But for decades, as Virginia has grown, we've seen that development happens first and roadways happen second. And we seem to emerge from crisis to crisis in different parts of the Commonwealth. So I'm glad to see all the studying being done now and discussion happening now. Even that spot where there's just those 5 traffic lights, it's quite a bit of challenge, and where the new distribution centers are now, just what's there today, it can be quite challenging trying to get trucks and cars onto 58 through there. So I'm kind of hopeful that using that study and looking at it, I almost have the word bypass in my lexicon already, because I look at how that's structured right now, and I personally don't see a way to drive all that additional traffic through and add all those distribution centers and still call that portion of 58 a limited access highway that's going to move freight or passenger vehicles in a safe and efficient way. So that would be my one comment, is that this group's done a very good job of moving from purely reactive to proactive, and that little section is a section that probably needs to have some real proactivity planned. Thank you.
and thank you for your observation and comment, because that was in my mind that the challenge of trying to get through, and from the feedback we received from some of the individuals we spoke with, some of the residents along that corridor enjoy having it almost as a nice rural road with stoplights and all. And so even though I think there's some studies that show how you can improve the access, there was pushback against that. And the concern is that if the I-87 interstate is approved, then 58 does become a bypass, because folks will go other areas, they'll go I-87, I guess, or they'll go 64, but very limited traffic. And one of my experiences during the course of the COVID and shutdown and everything like that was that I frequently go to North Carolina because I have family there. And whereas I used to use 58, because so many of the different fast food places and other places were closed, I couldn't guarantee I could find a rest stop. So I would go 64 because I knew, again, there are rest stops there. So I think there are a number of considerations that have to be made with respect to 58, but if we don't want it to become a bypass, we need to strategically make investments in it. Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
If I may, one thing, so we really look forward to future conversations on this. The one thing I will say, though, if you think back to the map that Dr. Case presented, and we showed these investments in the connectivity in these other areas, 64 and the connections to Richmond, Washington, D.C. and that corridor, critically important. 58 was very intriguing, because when you looked at those connections in the Research Triangle Park, Raleigh, Durham, Greensboro, even Charlotte, that they really started to pop up on those maps. So just maybe planting a seed to think about those two in tandem really start to look like worth real exploration. In the short term, and Mr. Shepherd, staying on that I-64 gap, we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes, but we continue to do that. Okay. Thank you, sir.
We ready for item 15?
Yes, John Mahaley will present this item. It's related to some really exciting investments on some transportation alternative projects. So John, over to you.
All right, thank you, Director Crum. Good morning, everyone. I know that I'm standing between you and lunch, so I'll try to be as brief as I can. So I'm going to provide a briefing on our fiscal year 2021-22 TA or transportation alternatives set aside. It's our project selection and funding process. So I know most of you are familiar with the program, but for those of you that aren't, I just want to give you a little bit of background. So in 2015, the FAST Act created this set aside for under the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program to fund these transportation alternative type projects. Now, this is a biennial process, so we won't do this again until the applications will be due in 2023 on October 1st. But the FAST Act was replaced by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And with that, additional funding has been identified for transportation alternatives. And the number that's being thrown around is about a 55% increase in the overall program. Now, we don't know if that's how it's going to turn out. The jury is still out on that, and we hope to hear something very soon about that. So the funding for this year's project selection process is for fiscal years 23 and 24. Now, I've listed the eligible project categories for transportation alternatives funding, and the overwhelming majority of the project applications that are received tend to be bicycle and pedestrian projects for trails and multi-use paths and such. But I just wanted to be aware that there are other project types that are eligible categories, including the conversion of abandoned railway corridors into trails, construction of turnouts, etc. We also have environmental mitigation activities, and then the recreational trails program, which is run by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. We have safe routes to schools, and then boulevards and other roadways in the right-of-way former divided highways. So there are quite a few different project categories, and I always urge everyone to try to come up with some different and unique ones, but we do have quite a need in the backlog to build out our rails and trails in the region. So here's the estimated available funding. Now this funding is based on how much was available in the last round. So for fiscal year 21 and 22, this is how much money we were able to get allocated for our TA set-aside program. So MPOs in transportation management areas have 6.1 million, that's statewide. Our CTB district members, they have 9 million or 1 million each, and that's per year. Our at-large members from the CTBs, 5 million statewide, and so total statewide we have 20.1 million. So not huge dollars, but our projects aren't that expensive either. I mean, they're usually less than $1 million, no more than $2 million. So for the HRTPO, our available funding per year, we estimate to be at 1.8 million. So in addition, our Hampton Road CTB member can allocate funds to projects within the HRTPO area. And as I mentioned, we will have some additional funding from the IIJA. This will be for fiscal years 22 through 26. And so, as I mentioned, these totals are being finalized. There's some rules that go along with this, so we just don't know yet. But my friends at VDOT assured me that this money's coming soon. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So for the last round, for fiscal year 21 and 22, we had about $5.7 million allocated in Hampton Roads. So just wanted to kind of go through the selection process. So the first step here is the VDOT Local Assistance Division has a call for projects and applications, and they process, validate, and score these projects. And then the TPO gets the scores from these projects, and then we bring it to our subcommittees and then to the board to make selections. Now, we sat down with Mr. Stant late January and had a great meeting, and he made his selections and his allocation recommendations for the new projects that we had listed. And then finally, the board, you all hopefully will approve a set of TA set-aside projects and allocations so we can push it up for the CTB to consider in their draft SYIP. Now, this is a little hard to read. Okay, it's a lot hard to read. is let me unwrap it a little bit for you. This is in your packet. And so if you want, you can kind of take a look at that. But I'll try to highlight as we go through here. So you see at the top of the list here, we have the city of Hampton has an Old Buckrow Road pedestrian improvements. Now that was partially funded from that last round. So we're always going to have at least one project that's not fully funded. So this happened to be that project for the last round. But we are planning to, or Hampton has already requested the remainder of the funding of about $414,000 that they need on this project that we should be able to handle with those IIJA funds. And once again, I'm hoping to hear that within the next few days, and then we'll go ahead and bring that back to the board to get that amendment processed. So moving on to the current year, the current process, we have up here the Newport News project. I can go through here down the list. There's a priority ranking. So based on the score, the rank across the district, this is how they are, just straight in numeric order. Number one being obviously the highest rank with the highest score, and then on down the list. Now I do have highlighted here, there are two projects here. These are safe route to school projects, but these aren't capital projects. These are for administration. So the max that they can score for these projects is 150, and that is out of the max of 300 for all the other projects. So you can see they ranked 1 and 2 in the district out of 2 submitted, but the overall ranking was down here at 13 and 15. Just want to clear that up first. Now, going down through here, our CTB member made his selections here. We have Chesapeake Trail Phase 2. We have Newport News Birthplace America Trail on Elmhurst to Yorktown. We also have another Newport News Birthplace America Trail, Yorktown Road to Newport News Park. And then we jump down here, another Chesapeake Trail Phase 3. And lastly, in York County, Grafton Drive Sidewalk. So then we get our transportation programming subcommittee together, and we sit down and we go through and take into consideration what our CTD member has allocated. And then the rule of thumb here is to fully fund each project as we go. So we kind of take that off the top. We fully fund any of the partially funded projects. And then we begin to allocate funding for new projects. And so you can see Mr. Scant kind of spread the money around a little bit, as you can see here. But we came in and we tried to fund everything fully, and then we put some money on some new projects. Now we ended up, as the last project funded, this is for the city of Suffolk. We are supposed to fund at least 50% of the project. So Suffolk is going to come back to the table as soon as these IIJA funds are identified and request that remaining amount to fully fund that project. Because until it's fully funded, you can't move forward. So our total amount that we have left to work with here is 0. So every single dollar we had was funded and or recommended for funding. And this is the chart that we're going to you will be approving today, if so be. Our schedule, there is no schedule. So October 1st of 2021 was when the applications would do. As I mentioned earlier, 2023, October 1st would be the next round when applications will be the deadline. And this is done through the SMART portal. October 21st, HRTPO Board endorsed the projects that are listed that were scored through the Local Assistance Division. Sat down with Mr. Stan, as I mentioned, January 25th, and made his selections and recommendations for projects and allocations. Our TPS committee of the TTAC made their recommendations for projects to go to the TTAC for consideration. March 2nd, TTAC weighed in, and this is where we are today. So we're hoping that you will recommend a set of projects and allocations to be included in the SYIP. Then this goes to the CTB in June, and that's where the final allocations and awards will be made. Here's just some information for your guidance. The HRTPO has a TA set-aside guide. It's on our website here. It's listed. Additional information from VDOT is listed here. And also the SMART portal, this is the address for that, is where the applications are submitted to. And then also VDOT's Local Assistance Division, there's a website for that as well. Today, our recommended action is to approve the TA set-aside projects and funding allocations as listed and as I described on slide number 7. That's all I have. Here's my contact information.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? There is action requested on this, I'm sorry, about center school.
Not about that, I want comments before you adjourn.
Do I know?
Let's have some comments before you adjourn.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. Any questions or comments on this one? All right, then I'd like to ask for a motion or a second to move approval.
Second.
And I guess we just do one of those, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed is no. Okay, motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, our next item will be our request for the board to take action to approve our consent agenda items today. Before you entertain that motion, second in action, I would like to bring members' attention to item that was included in the agenda under consent, 16.D as in David. It's entitled a resolution in support of funding for I-64 Peninsula widening, segment 4. If I may, Mr. Chairman, just a little bit of background. I know everybody around the table is aware that funding for Interstate 64 and finishing the gap to Richmond has been a regional legislative priority for us for the past 4 to 5 years. As the General Assembly progressed, there were 2 proposals offered for funding put towards the I-64 gap this year. The House proposed approximately $20 million to do planning and design work for the 29-mile gap from where the HRTPO improvements leave off the rest of Williamsburg to Bonnings Bridge, about the 29-mile gap. $20 million to do planning and design work for the gap. On the Senate side, $190 million was proposed. And that $190 million was proposed to be applied to the final 9 miles in Hampton Road, segment 4. Now, we think that you could do a little more than the 9 miles, and possibly go over the new Kent line with that as that design work happens. Of course, where we're at in the budget conferees are continuing their work, so that's all at play. But because this was proposed on the Senate side, I appreciated our state partners and VDOT staff reaching out to us and said, Bob, obviously right now we don't have funding for segment 4. It's in our long-range transportation plan, but it's not in what we call a fiscally constrained plan. It's in our vision plan. Our vision plan says if money becomes available, we will move any project funded over into our fiscally constrained long-range plan. I apologize for that bureaucracy. But that's the federal process that's important. So our VDOT partners from Richmond reached out to us and said, we don't know how this is going to proceed as the General Assembly wraps up. They said, is the HRTPO ready if the money becomes available to take action to place segment 4 in our fiscally constrained long-range plan? And is the TPO staff on standby and ready to do air quality conformity work with our state partners and, if need be, our neighbors in Richmond to do everything to bring this funding to bear? And of course, our answer as a staff was yes, we have that support from our TPO board and our PDC board. It's a regional legislative priority. Mr. Chairman, we included in your agenda today a resolution that says just that. What the resolution is under 16D is a statement that we continue to include the finishing of the gap in our regional legislative agenda, that it's unfunded, it's an unfunded priority in our current long-range plan, that we reaffirm that if money becomes available, we will move to put segment 4 in our fiscally constrained plan, and that we'll work with all relevant stakeholders on the air quality work that's needed to be able to bring that project forward. So, Mr. Chairman, this is sort of already, you've taken this action a couple of times, but we're just refreshing it and restating it and letting our partners in Richmond know that this money comes, we stand ready to make this happen.
And before I call on Senator Spruill, I'll wipe the smile off my face because if any of you are aware, he runs the Hampton Road Caucus meetings, he's the chair, and he runs a very, very tight meeting. So I'm gonna give him maybe 15 seconds to make his comment.
Talk about priorities.
Bless your heart. Mr. Mayor, I like what he said. On the Senate side, we want to hold to the 180. What you're talking about. 20 million, that's there. And that's important, Mr. Mayor. You can recall the Hampton Roads Caucus, we started from Williamsburg, going on this way up to Franklin. And what we were doing wrong was we were saying, I got to have Chesapeake. I got to have Virginia Beach. I got to have this. And you got the Republicans and Democrats. So I went to a Northern Virginia caucus to say, how do you always get the money coming to Northern Virginia? They said, what you're doing wrong, school. You're coming in with this Democratic Republican stuff in your area and this area. To get rid of all of that and come in as a region. We did that, as you can see, we did that. So now we're called the Hampton Roads Caucus. No more Republicans, no more Democrats. I don't allow them to say that in my meeting. The only thing you can say in my meeting is statewide, that's me. So the money from the Senate, we are holding out. If we're gonna burn the state down, we're gonna hold out for that money. We want to finish it. So that's where we are. And last thing, Mr. Mayor, I want to say, I know it's not it's easy to come out with the mayor and so forth. Don't count with West, pretend he's not here right now. But we had the Hampton Roads Caucus, we were trying to work with Suffolk on to look at the HRT, so forth. And I met with Dunham, with the mayor, Mike Newman. He's easy to get along with. He said, Spruill, all you gotta do is call the clerk off and set up a meeting. I said, damn. So the mayors, y'all are easy to get along with. And we're gonna do that soon. So to your point of view is this. We have learned to Hampton Roads. We have learned to stop being selfish. Look as a caucus, Hampton Roads Caucus, and we're gonna get what we need. Thank you so much. My 15 seconds are up.
Thank you, sir. Okay, now we need to ask for we ask for a motion a second to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Mr. Crum?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our final items are just for your information. You have your HRTPO Board 3-1 tentative schedule. As a reminder, we take April off. That will be the meeting date for HRTPO and Barumpa. You have your advisory committee minutes, a couple of pieces of correspondence for your information. Mr. Chairman, I have no order new business. I'd like to forward it back to you to see if there is any. If not, we can move to adjourn.
And now, Senator Spruill asked to make a comment, I guess, before we adjourn. Was that the comment?
Yes. Mr. Mayor, I'm asking to know my comment to you. As the first, I want to be able to thank Mr. Crump. Every meeting we have had with the Hampton Roads Caucus, he has been there for us. And to you, well, now you need to come. You need to come because we do things as a caucus. We have a nice turnout. And what we do that after we meet and after the citizen league, we get together as Hampton Roads Caucus and say, okay, what are we gonna do? And I think that's very important. We need your input because, for example, they were joking me about they want to take out the project from Chesapeake. I said, man, that's gonna kill me. You know better than that. But the kid just like the idea that when we meet, and a lot of citizens come to our meetings, we meet afterwards. Hampton Roads Caucus, say, what do y'all think? So they help us out a whole lot. If this group here will talk with your legislators when we meet and say, hey, this is really important. We're doing it now. We'll have to learn how to do it like Norfolk, Virginia. We'll bring the money home to Hampton Roads, but we need your input to tell us we are different there. We are Hampton Roads Caucus. We want to do what's best for you. So please let your legislators know what you want. When we meet, we can do that. Thank you so much.
Any other new business items for discussion?
Mr. Chairman, just to note that we have lunches for everybody over behind our reception area. And the HRPDC meeting will begin at 12:30.
Mayor Wilson?
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to let everyone know
that as of today, I will be foregoing my last name and for the remainder of the day, be known as Mayor Shannon.
And top of the morning to you.
We will close with this. Best wishes to Norfolk State University system in our region.
Yes.
We are adjourned.